Terve! Welcome to another episode of Finding Finland with your host, Rudy Owens, the podcast where we talk about all things Finland. Well, welcome to another podcast with Rudy Owens, the Finding Finland podcast. And today I am joined with Antti, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Palosaari?
That's perfect, yes.
So thanks for joining me today. And first of all, just want you to say, just if you could, just give a little short introduction to yourself. I just want to sort of start to say, I learned about your artwork and your creative products, which were some wonderful videos I found online and some of your animated work. Before I went to Finland, it was really very helpful to me to see some of your stuff before I went. So that's how I learned about you. Then I came back and learned about you. So I'm just very grateful you could join me today. So if you would love to just sort of give an introduction to who you are and the kind of work that you're doing on your multiple platforms.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for inviting.
Yeah.
It's always great to hear from Finnish American descendants across the ocean, and it's sort of like finding some lost connection that
Yep.
we know it's there, but you don't really think about necessarily.
That's
so
true.
Yeah, my name's Antti. I'm an animator by day and asleep by night. But yeah, besides my day job, which is doing animations for companies and such, I do animations for YouTube, where I explain and talk about Finnish mythology and folklore and history and all that kind of stuff that I think is really interesting, but there is not that much information out there, especially in English and in video format. So I basically started doing videos about subjects that I would like to see myself, but no one was doing at the time.
Yeah, I saw that in one of your videos from about 2 years ago. You sort of gave that, like, I wanted to see things I cared about, but no one was doing it. So I would just be the creator and create the content that I'm interested in. And you've done it.
Yeah, that's it basically.
Yeah, that's great. So, and then you're for folks who don't know you, so your channel handle on YouTube is Antimation, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And from what I see, I'm seeing primarily in English. So I'm just wondering why English?
Well, two reasons. First of all, because there wasn't a lot of stuff about this subject in English to begin with, and a more selfish reason is, of course, that there are a lot more English-speaking people in the world, so I can potentially reach a wider audience that way.
I figured that was it, but it's always curious if there was some other reason. And I wasn't sure if you were also doing some other place I wasn't aware of completely in another language, since Finns are more versatile in languages than most Americans who only speak one. So I'm always impressed by the Finnish. The woman I interviewed last week spoke 7 languages, plus she knew Greek and Latin. So pretty talented woman.
Yeah.
So I don't underestimate the Finns. So and can you share, you're in Finland, do you mind sharing where home is in Finland to help people place you on the map?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, where is your home city in Finland?
Yeah. So I'm in Tampere.
Oh, okay.
Which is, it's like, how would I say, a little bit more south from the middle, like maybe a couple 100 kilometers north of Helsinki.
Yeah.
It's like in a western, sort of towards the middle, but not
right.
really.
I was in Tampere actually this winter. I spent about five or 6 nights in Tampere. I have my cousins.
Oh, really?
I have 3 cousins who live in Tampere.
Nice.
So I was right near, very near where the big park is, at Kauppi, where you can access the trail system there, and then a little farther south by the lake where there's that sort of Swedish manor house, and then there's the lake where everyone has their second cottages a little further south on the highway. It was very nice. I just love the city. So I'm very jealous that is your home, and I'm in Portland, Oregon. So okay. And can you, so you're an animator, so just for the people out there who are interested in the creative process, can you just share what tools you're using to create your animated videos? Because I know you do your work by hand, you sort of do the demos, how you create your sort of animated sort of narrative videos where you begin a sketch and then the sketch sort of gets fleshed out into full animation, and then you begin with the narration and you add commentary and citations and sort of sarcastic comment, remarks every now and then. So just for the creative people, can you just share about how you're creating?
Yeah, well, I try not to go into too much detail that will bore the hell out of everyone,
Okay.
but I have a couple of different types of videos, but the ones that you mentioned that feature like hand-drawn illustration, which I draw on paper,
Yeah.
then that is scanned into the computer, and then yes, the sort of drawing animation is then faked in the animation software called After Effects.
Yep.
So it's not actually the real life drawing that happens in the videos, but it's sort of recreated artificially afterwards. And then I add all sorts of any other graphics and animations that might need to support it, and so on. And then, of course, I have the series about Kalevala, which is more like a little more towards an animated series kind of stuff that has characters and such. Of course, it's a bit more simple because it's for YouTube and with zero budget and so on. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean that's it, I guess, in a nutshell.
All right. And so is in this creative space, like, is there a world of creative people who are sharing ideas and doing similar work, and that you're sort of inspiring each other and pushing each other's boundaries to see who's going to do something different? Is there like a space of animators who are doing similar techniques, or is everyone just sort of discovering it on their own in that space?
Uh, well, in the professional space, yes, very much so. But there aren't really many others who do it for YouTube or to like educate people about these matters. So I'm pretty much out there on my own. But there are other channels, of course, but they are not so focused on animation. So
Okay.
I pretty much have to figure it out myself. And a large part of it is always like, how can I make an animated video that looks good and is interesting to the people, but
Yep.
then doesn't like take all of my time to create a 15-minute animated video? Like that's
Okay.
if I were to do it at the level that I do commercial projects, it would take ages, especially without budget. So that's always one thing.
Yeah, all right. So when I last checked in with you, so the ones that I watched before I went, so for people who don't know your channel, so if you just go to Antimation on YouTube, find your work, and then you have your videos just sort of arranged in the YouTube pattern, and you can see how many people visit. And the ones I watched before I left were of interest to me. So the ones I watched were why the Vikings never invaded Finland. That naturally interested me because I was interested in the Vikings, but that was sort of interesting history, and that sort of caught my eye. The Middle Earth is Finnish. So obviously for those of
Indeed.
us who know the Kalevala and who know anything about J.R.R. Tolkien, we probably learned along the way that he was inspired and stole a lot of his ideas from his time studying the Kalevala when he was at, I think, was he at Oxford? I think, is that where he was first encountered?
I don't remember, but sounds likely.
At university. And then you did a couple of others. You did one on the Hanun Vakuna, which was the sort of the square, the
That's
cross
right.
with the, how is that described? What's the way that's described? It's has another name, I think,
I think
as
it's a
well.
looped square.
Loop square.
If you're on a Apple computer, it's in the keyboard where the
Keyboard.
command
Yep.
key is, that symbol.
Right. So that was interesting to me because I was interested in that symbol because I've seen that symbol before, and I was drawn to it, and I began sharing it. and my own writing before I left because I thought it was uniquely Finnish and is just sort of a way to communicate culture and heritage. So those are the ones I saw, and what fascinated me as well was you were very devoted to accuracy and sort of almost a hyper scholar way of communicating, but at the same time with very vivid colors and very vivid drawings. So you sort of figured out a way to be sort of both a scholar and an artist. So how did these come together? Because most people in this world ignore facts. In fact, we discard facts, and reality is being created out of thin air with AI today, and facts no longer matter. So why do you care about the facts and telling these stories?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I think facts are always more interesting than whatever AI bullshit there might be out there. You know, no, it's and of course it's a big part of doing the work, like trying to be as accurate as possible, and of course mistakes happen occasionally here and there.
Yep.
But no, I think if you cover these topics, then I think you owe it to the people to actually present, you know, correct information. And well, I saw this one video by some very big channel that was explaining the history of Finland with memes and such. And okay, it was funny and it was entertaining, but like most of it was not very true, shall we say. And it has millions of views, so that annoyed me. And then I thought, well, fuck, I'm gonna make a better one myself. And that's why I ended up doing the History of Finland series, which is now a couple more parts and then that's finished.
Yeah, I myself had a moment when it came back in February, and I had just had my multiple doses of sauna in Tampere, and I went to Rajaportiin and Rahamienen, and so I could observe two very well-known historic saunas and what it was like. And then I come back to the USA and I see imagery of saunas, and it's sexy supermodels straight in towels and looking like they're ready for either a Hollywood shoot or a romantic involved event. And it was all such complete garbage that I just screamed, and then I wrote about that and just sort of like found some photographs from the actual city of Tampere, and it showed real people in the saunas and you know, they have beer bellies and tattoos, and they don't look like beautiful people. They look like normal people to me. And so I got really frustrated with that. And I just have been on this in my own world. There's this sort of desire to sort of correct sauna bastardization with correct information about what a sauna really is. And so I had a discussion of that with a guy 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me he's trying to build a genuine sauna in Michigan, where my great grandparents live. So I'm going off track.
Oh, that's great.
That's sort of where I come from too. So anyway, and I have to share this because I shared this with you before. So why the Vikings never invaded Finland, that always struck me as odd, because they were so. I went to Greenland. I visited the Viking settlements in Greenland. Some of the ones that perished sort of in the 1300s, 1400s, and the best known ones like of Eric the Red. No, it was Leif Erikson, sorry. And a very famous church there called Brattahlid. And I was very involved and very interested in that. It's like, okay, they went to Greenland, they went to Constantinople, they went to the Volga River, and yet they never crossed the Baltic Sea and made a home in Finland. So that struck me as odd. And then I went to the museum in Stockholm, and you were right. They documented it, that they never did that. So why did that interest you, that one topic? Because everyone loves the Vikings and they're always portrayed as the winners. So here they weren't the winners.
Yeah. Well, that's there are some like misconceptions, would I say, about the Viking Age and Finland in general. Like the thing is, when the Vikings started becoming popular around 100, 200 years ago, Finland was not yet an independent nation, along with Estonia and other Baltics. And we also have history from that same age, and the culture was largely similar on the coast. So they were also going around with boats and trading and raiding and such.
Yep.
But we never got to capitalize it at the time that other Nordics did,
Okay.
unfortunately. So the word Viking means more like a pirate or like a seaborne raider at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a ethnicity, it's more like a lifestyle or a job activity at the time, which the Finns, Estonians, who were more or less the same people at the time, were also involved in. And like there were also Scandinavian, Swedish Viking settlements on the coast of Finland, and they were occasionally allied, occasionally fighting with each other. So it's a little more complicated than my video would make it out to be, in fact. But yeah, I mean, Viking Age history, fascinating.
And if you have you been to the Viking Museum in Stockholm? Have you had a chance to visit?
No, unfortunately not yet.
Okay, well, it's worth a trip. I thought it was good, and then they have a wonderful map for people who are interested in the extent of their voyages, and it just showed where they created permanent colonies, and they would light up different parts of Europe and Africa and the Americas, and nothing was lighting up in Finland. It was dark. So that to me was quite interesting. So it's sort of, I thought it was, oh, the Finland, interesting. Okay. So I was just looking at your list of videos before before we got started. So you have quite a number of topics. So I think the way you described it in one of your places was the series is a passion project of mine to bring our ancient stories for everybody to enjoy in an easy, digestible form. So,
Well, that was surprisingly well put.
Yeah, and what inspired you? And that was about why you were doing your work on the Kalevala. And so, like, are others out there as interested? Because obviously, one of your most famous artists in Finland, Akseli Galen Kalala, did the very famous murals that are in the National Museum,
Yes.
plus other paintings. And as you can see, I have my Kullervo on. So the reason I have him is because I looked like him when I was this age. I had the same haircut. So he's sort of he's the bastard, and I like bastards. He was drawn to it, but not everyone is. So I'm just sort of curious, like how you found yourself very attracted to this very famous Finnish myth, which now is recognized by the EU as a sort of a European great work of oral art.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we had a kids version of it when we were small, like the K9 Kalevala by a very famous Finnish illustrator and author. And well, I mean, what's there not to like? Like monsters and heroes and villains and magic and battles and all the good stuff that you find in fantasy also. And then it's somehow so like because it's right from here. It's not like a distant Hollywood production or something, but it's something right from the woods where we grew up. So I think that adds an element of interest, definitely. And also, I think it's not as although it is known to some extent to people who are into this kind of stuff, but besides that, it's not very well known even inside Finland to most people. Like maybe they've heard about it in school for a bit, but don't necessarily know what it's about and how significant it has been historically, when we were becoming independent and such.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I just thought I would share. I actually decided to go to Finland on Kalevala Day in 2023. Nice. And it was, I found it. I remember finding that in some of my social media feeds. And I remember realizing I had to do this trip. And it was that day when I saw that, I realized that I really needed to connect, sort of finally make my connection with my Finnish heritage. At the time, I didn't know who my distant relatives were because the families had lost connection for about 50 years. And it was that day when I just sort of made a commitment I was going to do it. And then the rest, then I got lucky, and then I came, and it was just this fabulous trip, and it worked out great. But I sort of have a special moment of love for the Kalevala because of my own sort of little story. So that to me, it connects with me personally. But you know, when I was reading it, one thing that struck me, and maybe you've noticed, like the creation myth, one of the versions of the Kalevala, I don't know if it's the old Kalevala or the new Kalevala, but one of the origin stories is, I forget, was it an eagle puts its nest on the knee, and I forget whose knee it was on. Do you know whose knee was it resting on?
No, I think it's the sky spirit Ilmatar.
Okay. And then one of the eggs broke. It fell. I think the nest fell and the eggs broke, and then from that life came.
Yeah.
And it's very similar actually to one of the creation myths in the Pacific Northwest of the Tlingit Indian.
Okay.
And so they have a raven, and in their myth, the man was created when Raven found a shell, and Raven was curious because Raven is Raven. So the Raven
Yeah.
has to turn the shell over, and then Raven turned the shell over, and then there was a baby human. And it's because of Raven that man came into the world. So
Yeah,
so
that's
there's always
cool.
it's sort of there's some sort of similarities, different parts of the world, different people, but very much
There are
connected to different
always,
herds.
yeah. And the egg myth, I think it's also exists somewhere in the Middle East,
Okay.
and some creation myths that we have that are not necessarily in the Kalevala, but they have a lot in common with other Native American myths, like thing. And you know, there's the whole thing about the primordial sea that you find pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
And some of these researchers have linked that they come from, you know, tens of thousands of years ago, before the people migrated from what is now like the far end of Siberia to the
Yep.
Americas and such. So that's like, I don't know, I find it super cool that there are these tens of thousands of years old connections that we can still trace back. And I don't know, I think it's amazing.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. So I I I think yours was one of the only ones I found that really tried to explain the Kalevala. So has that connected with people around the world who knew nothing about it, or is it just hardcore people who are like myth lovers? Because for me, I love myth because myth tells me about truth. And so in my life, it's always the myth that have always been the most truthful things that I have encountered in life. Like I'm adopted. I'm a bastard, and in myth, the bastard has a certain role, and there's a myth around the bastard, and he always appears in different forms. And there's always a trickster, and there's always, you know, there evil is represented one way, and good is represented one way, and women are represented in some way in some patterns, and so there's always jokers as well, or the court clowns, or these various characters always sort of keep emerging in myth. So I'm just curious. So, like, who's been drawn to your work on this very famous Finnish myth?
No, I would say it's both the hardcore mythology fans and then some people who've never heard of it before. So that's pretty great. And some from some very surprising locations, like I often get comments from India or
Okay.
Australia or somewhere, with people who don't have a Finland connection, but they've somehow found it and found it interesting. So that's really great. And then there is, oh, of course, the Finnish Americans.
Yep.
That is another big group. And then some Latin Americans who are very drawn to Finnish metal music, and through that they've also found the Kalevala and stuff. So that's also
Yes.
nice.
I think that's one of Finland's great exports to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have a Finnish heavy metal band here in Portland, Oregon at the end of August. My cousin already told me I need to see them. So I think I have to do this out of familial
Which
duty.
band?
I don't have it written down. It's a band that's doing a big tour of North America. That's all I know. I just copied it into my
Okay,
so
I'll definitely
that's
go
my
and see.
cousin who probably knows more about it than I do. So that was you said you've got to see it. Okay, I'll see it. So there we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we never actually explain what the Kalevala is. So can you give a brief sort of 2-minute description of what it is and why it's important to Finland and why it's a
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So Kalevala is it's a book compiled by a academic called Elias Lönnrot some 150, 200 years ago.
Yep.
That was the time in Europe in history when nationalism, not in a bad word kind of way like it is sometimes today, but
Yep.
it was a big thing. It was rising. The nations were finding their roots and their myths and becoming independent and all that kind of stuff. So this guy then thought that, damn, we are becoming a nation of our own, but we don't have like a unified version of mythical history or something like that. And so he went to the areas of modern day Russia where they still practice this ancient tradition of rune singing. And then he collected these ancient runes and poems and he compiled them into this book, which is much like the Iliad or
Yep.
Odyssey or these
Yep.
ancient cornerstones of mythical fiction, so to speak.
And were they
And then
sung? Weren't the traditions were they just oral or were they sung? Were they lyrical or not?
they were sung mostly,
Okay.
sung in a very specific verse and rhythm. And yeah, that is quite unique to the Finnish or Baltic Finnic peoples.
Right. And my Estonian friend reminds me there is a version there as well in Estonia.
Yeah, yeah. It got made sometime after the Kalevala,
Yep.
inspired by that largely.
And then there was the old Kalevala, there was the first edition, and then there was the other Kalevala that came after that, which
Yeah,
was I can't forget if it was, I think it was condensed. The second version was more condensed and
yeah, and
stories.
I think it's more edited to form a cohesive story,
Yep. And
something like that.
and for people who haven't read it, it's just has a beautiful sing-song quality and the way it describes like food or nature or animals.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I forget who is the character who drowned in crossing the river going to Tuomela. It was the
That's Lemminkäinen.
yeah, and he died or he was sunk to the river and his mother went to search for him, and it described the mother was described as like every animal that you could imagine that would be in Finland. She was compared to the animal and the intensity of her searching for her son. So
Yes.
and it just struck me as just very beautiful and very naturalistic and very Finnish. That's how I would describe it. And for people who want to get it, you can find it on free on Gutenberg online. You can just download it today. You can look at it. It's not
Yeah.
copyright protected, or you can buy a copy and highly recommend it. So you also have something just a quick sidebar. So trolls. Tell me
Yeah.
about what is the troll in the Antti universe? And you have some old comic. So what does the troll represent to you in your who you are as an artist and storytelling? And you describe how important it is to the Finns as well as Norwegians. We even have a giant a Danish artist has a 20-foot troll that is right now on display here in Portland. So it's a big
Nice.
the kids. So it's very cool. So I'm into trolls. So tell us
Yeah, great.
and your work.
Yeah, yeah. So trolls, of course, are important creatures here in the north, but the ones that are more famous, as with most things, are of course the Scandinavian trolls that are a little different than the older Finnish trolls, shall we say. But of course, the Scandinavian kind of trolls have later on migrated here as well, and they are now part of the stories here too, but like older Finnish trolls, they tend to be not so large. They usually don't live on the mountains, but underground,
Mhm.
and they're not always that evil or nasty necessarily, but they can also help humans, for example, with childbirth and things like that. But also, you need to be in good terms with them, or bad things might happen to you. And when you are in their territory in the woods, you should be respectful and all that kind of things, which I think is still carried on in the culture this day. Like when you are moving or when you're in the woods, you are in nature, so it's a sacred place, and you have to respect that and don't dump trash or anything like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, why am I into trolls then? That's a
Because the
good
troll,
question.
the troll is a guest star in some of your videos, even though the troll isn't real.
It is, and it will be again in the next one. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I guess the way I see them is they are these a little bit scary, ugly creatures like orcs, but also like they're not that scary necessarily. Like they're pretty chill most of the time. But
Okay.
if you piss them off, then you are not in a good place.
Okay.
So they're, I mean, somehow they reflect what the Finnish, the essence of Finnishness to me. Like we're very, very calm, peaceful people if you just let us be. But if you make trouble, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
grossly oversimplify it like that.
Okay. All right. So that you have something called Trolled Comics. So this is a print edition, and is that for
Yeah,
sale? Is that still a product that you're selling right now?
absolutely. Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can even get it in the US. And the second one is hopefully, emphasis on the word hopefully, coming out later this year.
Okay, so this is so what is it? How would you describe that as a comic book form? What form would it be? How in the world of comic art, how is it? What's the proper name for this type of product?
So that's a tough one, but I would say it's something like mythical, dark, historical dark fantasy set in ancient Finland with trolls.
Okay, and it's comic book format, or is it bound? Is it sort of like a comic book with like staple setting, or is it like what does it physically look like? The size and the dimensions?
Yeah, it looks very much like these basic comic books that
Okay,
I think cost a few dollars there, and I think you have all these nice comic book shops that at least we see in the TV shows.
yeah, there's one
You
right near
know,
me. There's a nice comic book
okay, awesome,
near me, so they're still alive and well. So people still buy comics. So hi, and
great
how hard
stuff.
is it to compete in the comic book space with so many people who are creative?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to make any money with this, it would be extremely hard. So this is and also I chose a style that is very, very slow to draw, and that's why it takes ages. So yeah, I mean, it's extremely hard if you want to do comics full time. I would absolutely not recommend to anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about that as well. Like, how would one tell a story? And right now you can quickly. It's scary with AI. You can storyboard so many concepts and ideas very quickly. You can sort of the corporate world has gravitated to this. Like they're trying to come up with their pitch, their advertising campaign, and give me a storyboard like with a beer commercial set in Ipanema Beach, Brazil, and it could sketch it out for you like that, right? And so
Yeah.
and so obviously people are using it as shortcuts, but what's the payoff for putting all that time into something as meticulous as the drawings you're doing to have a final product? What's the satisfaction for you?
Well, the satisfaction is in the making of it. Like some, you know, corporate shareholder will never get this, but the thing why I do this is not that then I have a product that I can sell to a lot of people for maximum profits, but it's the the joy of making it and then looking at it and being like, oh, look, I made this, and I put all this work into this, and that clearly meant something other than just what the final comic book will be. Like,
Yeah.
there is absolutely no joy for me in typing a few words and then pressing a button and then getting something that it spits out. Like, what the fuck is the point of that? No, I don't want to do that.
I get that. It's like I do get that. Yeah, it's interesting. One of my favorite artists is Albrecht Dürer, and I don't know if
Yeah,
you're familiar with his work, but he
of
did
course.
some really dark and macabre stuff. He did
Yeah.
stuff. There's a great collection. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. We have a very good collection of I guess it would be Renaissance, post-Renaissance etchings and sketches, and his work figures prominently. And he has some really, like, one is takes place where a knight is returning from war and is being by the devil, and it has ominous undertones of the Black Plague sort of all over the place. And he has other ones that are very meticulous landscapes that are almost like travel photography. And then he also figured out a way to do this beautiful work and then commercialize it because he could generate multiple prints from the same. So he did the hard labor, but he also figured out a way to have a mass to make his impact that way. So I guess you can do it. So is there an opportunity to have that mass reach like someone like he was able to do? Is that possible in the world of comics in the way you're creating, or is it has to be this time intensive labor of just passion and love and what you're creating that way?
I mean, I guess it could be. Not a lot of people will ever achieve that, but there are, of course, some indie comic makers who have become very popular and successful.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is possible, but whether I will ever be there, we will see.
Yeah.
We will see. But it, of course, helps to have a YouTube channel with some audience who already know you from there. So
Yeah.
there is that, but
One of
like
my
it is possible, but not easy.
Yeah, a guy I went to high school with, he was 2 years older than me. He's an African American artist, wildly passionate about Batman. He loved everything about Batman when he was young, even though Batman wasn't black. He thought Batman was still pretty cool. And he ended up becoming a professional animator and then joined Disney and is one of their lead animators now working at Disney. And that's very corporate. And so he decided to sort of, I think, rebel 2 to 3 years ago during the racial uprisings we were having in the death of George Floyd. And then he began to do a series of he would be inspired by stories he was reading about African Americans who were killed by police violence. And then these became, just sort of pieces of art that he just did for himself to satisfy his soul. And then they got discovered. And then after they were discovered, someone converted them to sort of 8 foot, 9 foot tall renditions that were then just covering some galleries in St. Louis. So I think, he never
for him.
Comic book part of his soul.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, could your work then be translated into that later if the stars align and the roads the right way? Is that possible?
I mean, sure. Why not? If there is some interest, why not?
Okay. Well, you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing you have a passion for, and I do as well, is history, which most people do not have a passion for. Most people know nothing about history. It's one of the reasons we have so many problems. And I just thought
absolutely.
I just thought I would read something the way you described it. This was on your medieval Finnish wars, which I knew nothing really about. I mean, I knew some of the context, but not in the Baltics. And then you just sort of have this very unique style where you say, the Middle Ages was a relatively decent period to be alive in the history of Finland, or so we concluded in the previous episode. Now it's time to shatter that illusion and take a moment to talk about the key events of the Middle Ages. Those include war, wrath, death, and slaughter. And that brings to mind like those etchings of Albrecht Dürer. You know, he did.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm very happy that you make that connection.
So, so why is it important to include those dark themes in your storytelling? Because they're dark for some
Yeah,
people.
but they're like very, very essential in the history and why things have gone the way that they have, I think.
Yeah,
And also when, for example, we learn a little bit about this in school, but we don't really get the full picture of just how awful things might have been.
yeah,
And we have like some pretty decent surviving records from there that we can actually know some things. So
right. Now, what fascinated me before I left, so I began to discover some of the more recent history. So for me, the Finnish immigration period is of interest to me, and the American historians sort of classify this beginning around 1870, ending in around 1930, where we had quota systems where we began to limit from Europe. We always kept out those from Asian countries and other countries that were not white. That's the American racial way we do it, and it's very racist. But it was that period where there was about 345,000 Finns. And then right before that, I realized there was the famine of the 1860s,
yes.
where about 1 out of every 10 people died. And then you addressed the worst famine, which was in the 1600s. And I knew nothing about this until I found a scholarly book where I think 1 out of every 3 people in what we consider Finland died. And so
Yeah.
does anyone even in Finland know that? And does anyone understand that as sort of like this historic event in the memory of the people?
Uh, I don't think many people are aware of that. No, like maybe the later the 1860s famine is much better known,
Yeah,
and I think it is still somewhat remembered to this day from the past generations. Like for example, if I take an example that our grandparents they would put you a lot of food on the plate when you were a kid, and then you had no choice. You had to eat all of it or you would get beaten. And we didn't really understand what the fuck that was about. But then when you look at the timeline and you realize that, well, their grandparents have actually survived these famine years. So it's, dying from starvation was a very real thing to them.
yeah,
And it was still remembered sort of
yeah,
by our grandparents. So
yeah,
that's one
yeah.
example.
Yeah. No, I come from the world of public health. And so the public health perspective is what are what's called epigenetic effects, where you have an environmental event that's catastrophic, and then it creates all kinds of harm on the next generation, which is actually absorbed into the genes. And so you pass down the harm of an environmental trauma like starvation can then be
Yeah.
passed down as a negative health outcome like heart disease. And so you have these outcomes that take place in the environment that cause harm, but at the same time, the people who survived were resilient, so they had some sort of adaptive capacity. So they also got some
Mm.
benefit too. So, our bodies are living sort of vessels of these events. Maybe not our minds, but our bodies are. So I think that's where the science gets very interesting, and they can look at these events and maybe the Finns, I always, the Finns got a lot of respect. I think everyone who knows anything about Finnish history knows a little bit about World War II and the Finns and
I'm sure, yeah.
their capacity. And you even documented this in one of your nice videos on the Winter War, which is one of 3 wars. And so I think most people don't know why the Finns were so strong and resisting. And I guess my question is that can these stories from the past, do those tell us about what happened more recently? Is that are those a window from the past to the present? Is that why? Because most Americans don't know why, but we sort of know that. So are there reasons for that? Like it's like did that matter in Finland surviving that conflict? Or was it just because they just got sick of Russia after 100 years and say, that's it, no more, we're done. It's never going to happen again.
Well, I think that's definitely part of it, but also, well, it must be a pretty well researched topic if someone wants to take a look at it. But yeah, I think it might be a lot of reasons. And yeah, I mean, we would like to say that it's the Finnish sisu and toughness, but I think there are other reasons too that are more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I don't really have a good answer to that, but it has to come from well, one thing that if I would pick out from the recent history before the war was that after we got independent and we had a bloody civil war,
Yep.
so then the politicians after that were quite successful in sort of uniting the people again and sort of making the country so that everyone found it very much worth defending and fighting for, which I don't think we have that kind of unity today necessarily
Yeah.
as we had back in the day. So I think that was one very, very important factor.
Yeah. Okay. So today, what your creative work has gone into the past, and sort of you've told the story of Finland. I mean, this is Finnish storytelling to me. This is why I like it. I learned from it. So, are you going to be doing stories about modern day Finland? I mean, you've done some. Is Finland a feminist country, for instance? So, what's next if you're going to be turning your gaze to the present? What may be coming up? Is there anything of interest that we could see from you in the future, near future?
Yeah, well, I have sort of sensed that if I want to get more popular, that would be the easy route
Yeah.
to speak about more modern day things, but doesn't interest me as much. But for example, now we have Midsummer coming,
Yeah.
which is an important celebration. And I am going to speak a little bit about the backgrounds of that and how it was celebrated in the past and what's the mythology behind it and
Cool.
that kind of thing. So I don't necessarily intend to dive into modern day culture that much,
Yeah.
but I will mention it, on occasions how it connects with the past and stuff. So no, but I will very much stick to the past and
Okay.
myths part because there are already a million channels that talk about Finnish culture of the present. So I don't really want to add to that necessarily. Like that,
So,
I think that's already covered well enough.
yeah. So, like, I guess the question is, do you think Finland is well understood by people outside of Finland, or is based on what you're seeing there, is our perception just sort of, I think everyone now in the US, when we see Finland, our perception is one, it's a happy country because of all these silly United Nations stories. They're not silly. They're the same story recycled and told again and again.
Yeah,
Very well on many key indicators. So they get this really jarring sensibility that this country they don't really know is happy and it shouldn't be. And why is that? And that's interesting. So that's news. Then we know it's a place where there's lots of lakes and it's north. And then we call it a Scandinavian country if it's, and even though it's not. And then we know it's a place
yeah,
where there's a lot of saunas. And that's probably how Americans think about uh, Finland. And then it's also a place where, for people like me, our ancestors came from. That's our perception in the
yeah.
US.
I mean, those are not incorrect by any means, but I find that also from my experience living abroad is that even if you know a lot of things and facts about another place, it is not until you actually go there and see for yourself that you
Yep.
can, really understand how it is
Yep.
somewhere else. Like I think, for example, our perception of the US is, well, it's coming largely from movies and TV and social media, and it's not really, we don't understand it the same way as if we grew up there, of course. So
Excellent point.
we might know some facts, but you know we might not see the forest from the trees, as we say in Finnish.
Yeah. I think you're right on that. All right, cool. Um, Okay, so you say you have another comic book coming out. You're going to keep focusing on either on the myths or these moments in the past. Is there any other project that you want to be highlighting what we can look for from bearing your name or your brand or your troll?
No, well, I think that's definitely a little more than I can handle at present. So
Yep.
I think I'll just focus on those for now.
That's cool.
There's a million things that I would like to do, and I hope to eventually do this YouTube and related things, full time, because now I have way more ideas of videos and stuff that I would like to make than what I can actually get down to and have time to do.
Just quickly, just because I know lots of people, there's all kinds of stories about how people track their ideas. What's your method of capturing that fire? When you have that fire, where do you put it? How do you remember it? Where do you keep it?
Well, I do write them down occasionally, but a lot of things is just in the back of my head until I actually get to it. And maybe stuff that is more important, then I might start drafting it into a script. And then, if I forget some less important topics with time, then that's fine. Maybe they were not meant to come into flesh anyway.
Yeah. I find if I mainly write. And so usually what happens is there's something really just bothering me, like I'm running or I'm walking, and then I just have to just focus, and then I just get sucked into it. And that's how it happens. It's just sort of like, it's usually a process where there's some time and energy has been spent figuring something out, and then I have to finally bring it all together and create something at the end. And then at the end, it makes sense. And, that's, I think my last year has been that. Like, for some reason, I was interested in Finland. And so I did this project, and then I realized I had written like 20 stories about Finland in the past year. And it's like, well, that's almost a book. Maybe I need to write a book. So, and then it's, the book's not good enough. Maybe I need to do a podcast. And so then one thing leads to another, and they just start having a life of their own. So, and then I
that's how it goes
to connect. So this is good for me, because then I get to meet some people and learn a little bit about what they're up to. And it's really great to hear about your creative process and these stories. And I love them. I have one last question I have to ask you. Sure. What ratio of your audience is women to men or men to women? Because this seems more guy oriented to me, but I'm just curious, am I wrong?
No, you're right. I don't remember exactly, but I think it's something like 75, 85 to 25, 15. Okay. The majority is men.
Okay. All right. Well, at least you know that. I mean, have you thought about trying to expand to the half the population that's out there, people who might be interested in you, but it's too much of a guy thing? Have you thought about that?
No, not that much. No, like I want to make the kind of videos that I want to watch myself. So,
yep.
I'm in a sense always making them for myself.
Yeah.
So that way it also stays relevant and interesting to me. Yep. As opposed to just trying to maximize the potential audience, and I might get bored of that.
Yeah.
Faster. So okay. I think for now I'll just stick to what I'm doing.
All right, that's cool. All right. Well, Antti, it's getting late for me, and it's almost been an hour of time. So I just really enjoyed getting the chance to meet you in person, and
likewise.
Learn a little bit more about your work, and I'll be following you on Antimation and looking for some more stuff, and we'll probably get your comic as well.
Right.
And if I head to Tampere again to see my cousins, maybe we can grab a coffee or go to Radiportin or somewhere. And
yeah, absolutely. Let me know.
All right, it's a deal. Anyway. Okay. So have a good day and enjoy midsummer.
You have a good night. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you again. Kiitos vielä kerran for spending time with us today on the Finding Finland podcast. Be sure to visit us for more conversations about all things Finland. Finland. Remember, you can find all of the podcast episodes on your favorite podcasting platform by visiting the Finding Finland webpage. See you again soon.